As Carpathia loads Titanic's passengers, Californian approaches from the north. Wireless operator Cyril Evans has only just learned of Titanic's fate from the German liner Frankfurt. Captain Stanley Lord, watching the drifting Carpathia, recalls his officer's report of 8 rockets fired by a distant ship sometime after midnight. Although he will never publicly admit it, Lord must surely suspect that the lights seen by his crew were those of Titanic. Survivors have just been rescued. Californian is too late to help. "8:50 a.m. Titanic survivors crowd the decks and saloons as Carpathia's passengers help provide aid and comfort. This vacation cruise has truly become a mission of mercy. The ship sails over the location of the sinking. A little wreckage and only one floating body are visible. The ice field is a low wall, blinding white in the sun. One berg stands out, its base marked with what could be a scrape of Titanic's paint. Captain Rostron asks his purser and chief steward for a full survivor count and prepares to return to New York. Rostron has one more request before leaving the area. Episcopal priest Roger Anderson agrees to lead prayers in this moment of tragedy. There is thanksgiving for the survivors, followed by a brief funeral for the lost. The sobbing survivors are overpowered by grief. In New York, White Star's president Philip Franklin has received an early morning call from a reporter with the news that Titanic has called for help and is sinking. The story has already gone to press, and New York is soon buzzing with rumors. Wireless operator David Sarnoff, working on the roof of Wanamaker's department store, relays messages from ships at sea. Breaking news is posted faster than the papers can print it. Most morning headlines claim Titanic is injured but still afloat, with all passengers safe. But the New York Times assumes the worst and publishes it. Panic spreads. As Carpathia steams west, Ismay gives Captain Rostron a message for White Star's New York office, which reads,
"Deeply regret advise you Titanic sank this morning after collision iceberg, resulting serious loss life. Full particulars later. Bruce Ismay."
Titanic's owner sits alone in Dr. McGee's room, shocked, defeated, racked with guilt. At the doctor's request, fellow survivor Jack Thayer tries to help.
He was staring straight ahead, shaking all over like a leaf. Even when I spoke to him, he paid absolutely no attention. I have never seen a man so completely wrecked. First-class passenger, Jack Thayer.
Harold Cottam, Carpathia's wireless operator, has been on duty all night. Now he is exhausted and overwhelmed by his workload, which is filled with official traffic and outgoing messages from survivors. In addition, Captain Rostron orders that a complete list of survivors be sent as soon as possible. Harold Bride, Titanic's surviving wireless operator, is able to help. Despite his fatigue and frost-bitten feet, he relieves Cottam at the Morse key whenever necessary. During the 4-day voyage, Carpathia's signal will be broadcasting non-stop. Cottam and Bride will ignore everyone, including the news wires and even President Taft, in the interest of serving Titanic survivors. Throughout April 15th, desperate families of Titanic passengers and crew jam the White Star Line offices in New York, London, and Southampton. With no real news yet, all rumors seem true. Finally, at 6:16 p.m., Olympic sends New York a simple message: Titanic has gone down. 2 hours later, White Star's Philip Franklin announces it to the American public. The news crosses the Atlantic by cable. No one knows who is alive or dead. The first numbers appear. About 675 crew and passengers picked up. For a ship whose crew alone was over 900, this can only mean the worst for Southampton. Hopeful speculations give way to horrible predictions. London's Daily Sketch even claims that Carpathia, with her precious cargo of survivors, is in peril. Lists of names are posted and then corrected with each vague new report. Familiar names are misspelled or omitted. There will be no relief from the confusion until Carpathia reaches New York. Titanic survivors settle uneasily into crowded new quarters with their sympathetic hosts. Passengers and crew share or give up their cabins. Under these conditions, Carpathia is too small to allow anyone much privacy. The dining saloons and other common areas are filled with sleeping refugees, driving many others out onto the decks. Titanic's lifeboats loom over them in a haunting reminder of the disaster. Amidst the crowding, surviving family members reunite. Newly made widows, recalling their own lost husbands, are tortured by the presence of men who have survived. Tuesday night, Carpathia runs into a thunderstorm. By Wednesday, she encounters fog, which frightens some of the survivors. As the fog lifts Thursday afternoon, all can hear the Fire Island foghorn. By 6 p.m., Carpathia takes on a harbor pilot from Ambrose Lightship, and an escort of tugboats and private craft follow her, hooting and clanging, into New York. Photographers' flashes speckle the rainy dusk. Reporters shout questions through megaphones. One actually boards Carpathia, only to be grabbed by crew members and taken below. People on the smaller boats hold up signs asking for Titanic passengers by name. A different kind of ordeal is about to begin. Carpathia's first stop is at White Star's dock rather than Cunard's. She must unload the 13 Titanic lifeboats that she still carries on her own decks. These lifeboats are all that remain of the sunken Titanic. Carpathia is dwarfed by the long pier that had been constructed with so much effort to receive the vast Olympic and Titanic. Amidst thunder and lightning, Pier 54 is packed with thousands of people who are here to greet Carpathia. Waiting are friends and relatives of Titanic passengers, city officials, the immigration commissioner, doctors, nurses, and coroners. Stretchers, blankets, and ambulances wait as well. The Salvation Army and the Sisters of Mercy are here to provide aid and comfort for those without family. From the Boy Scouts to the New York Stock Exchange, delegations have come with cash for those who have lost everything. A crowd of 28,000 people spreads out behind the police cordon. Reporters are everywhere, looking for a good story, eager to share this moment with the world. Titanic survivors come down Carpathia's gangways and pass through the pier building. Some, like Harold Bride, cannot move without assistance. As they pass, the crowd jostles to see their faces, shouting the names of loved ones whose fates are still unknown. For every reunion that happens, many more never will. One man here to greet the survivors is Senator William Alden Smith. This Michigan Republican has been appointed by the Senate Committee on Commerce to investigate the sinking of Titanic. He boards Carpathia with a troop of U.S. Marshals and a handful of subpoenae, one of which is for Bruce Ismay. The investigation's hearings begin the very next day at 10 a.m., and Senator Smith wants Ismay to be there. The passenger lists posted in America and England become more accurate following Carpathia's arrival in New York. The crowds outside White Star and the newspaper offices watch with hope and fear for familiar names. Southampton is hardest hit by the news that only about 200 of Titanic's 900 crew members were saved. The London Daily Mail reports,
"In the humbler homes of Southampton, there is scarcely a family that has not lost a relative or friend."
The Daily Sketch embellishes with a more sensational tone.
In the district, there are many families for whom the spectre of want is in ambush, if the breadwinner has sunk with the Titanic. A rumor is persistent that a young mother who had given birth to twins and whose husband was a fireman has died of shock.
On Friday, April 19, England observes a national day of mourning for Titanic. Roughly 10,000 people attend a memorial service at St. Paul's Cathedral in London. Those who cannot find room inside pay their respects in the street. The dead are mourned, and prayers of thanks are offered for those who were rescued. Churches in other cities are also crowded with those gathering to remember the tragedy and pray for its victims. In Queenstown, flags fly at half-staff for the sons and daughters of Ireland who will never fulfill their dreams in the new world. Even as the United Kingdom mourns, America asks questions. Senator Smith convenes an inquiry in New York the morning after Carpathia docks. America is still reeling from the shock of the disaster, and Smith has moved quickly to collect survivor testimony while the incident is still fresh. His colleagues know that he has created the subcommittee and appointed himself as chairman because he is an outspoken opponent of J.P. Morgan. Titanic's loss may prove to be an avenue of attack against the owner of International Mercantile Marine, White Star's parent company. After 2 days at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, the hearings will move to Washington, D.C. Those crew members and passengers who have not received a congressional subpoena are free to return to their lives. The first witness called at the hearings is Bruce Ismay. His answers are short, evasive, and lack substance. He claims he never ordered Titanic pushed to her maximum speed, that he never showed Mrs. Ryerson the Baltic's ice warning, and that he boarded the lifeboat only when there were no other passengers visible on deck. Senator Smith is not happy with Ismay's performance. Whether he disbelieves Ismay or simply dislikes him, he seems determined to hold White Star's director responsible for the tragedy. Ismay will be required to answer further questions when the hearings move to Washington, and Smith only illustrates the distance between the first and third class experience. It also raises the specter of discrimination against the less privileged passengers. In the North Atlantic, the Canadian steamer McKee-Bennett has been at the site of the Titanic disaster for 2 days and recovered 80 bodies by April 23rd. Immediately after the disaster, White Star had chartered the commercial cable company ship to search the waters. The bodies are catalogued and many are photographed and identified. Those in no condition to travel are weighted with iron bars and buried at sea. The rest are embalmed by undertakers. First-class passengers are placed in coffins and stacked on deck. Second and third class are stored in canvas bags and rest on ice in the hold. In all, McKee-Bennett recovers a total of 306 bodies. 190 are taken back to port, and the other 116 are buried at sea. The White Star Line is vulnerable to bad publicity after the loss of Titanic. On April 24, the company is dealt a blow when crew members of its other wonder ship, Olympic, go on strike over insufficient lifeboats. Her voyage must be cancelled until the matter can be settled. From this point on, ocean liners will sail with enough lifeboats for all on board. Safety measures can no longer be taken lightly. On April 29, the Red Star liner Lapland arrives at Plymouth, carrying 167 of Titanic's surviving crew members. However, before any of these survivors can head home to Southampton, they are detained for questioning by the British Board of Trade representatives. The first to be released are 85 seamen and stokers, under the condition that they not speak to the press. Cooks, stewards, and stewardesses wait their turn. Finally, the rest arrive in Southampton to walk into the middle of an open-air memorial service, where over 50,000 people have gathered to celebrate the living and remember the dead. Even as some of the living make their way home, some of the dead approach their final resting place. McKee Bennett sails into a silent Halifax, flying her flag at half-mast. She offloads her sad cargo at a Navy pier. First, the unembalmed crew on stretchers and in bags, then third and second class in burlap from their bed of ice in the hold. Finally, first class in their coffins from the deck. The unclaimed bodies, known and unknown, will be finally buried in Halifax cemeteries. White Star sets up a fund to pay indefinitely for the grave's upkeep. On May 3rd, the British Board of Trade, which is the governing body over British maritime law, begins its investigation at the Scottish Drill Hall in London, a room with such bad acoustics that it's soon necessary to move the hearings elsewhere. Lord Mersey is the man in charge. Like Senator Smith in America, Mersey is no nautical expert. He is a judge who has been appointed Wreck Commissioner with the understanding that he will shift blame for the disaster away from the Board of Trade. After all, it was that body's outdated regulations that called for so few lifeboats on such a large ship. Lord Mersey will lead an investigation rich in technical detail, focusing more on the ship than her passengers. After 2 weeks of technical details, including a new round of lifeboat tests and timing drills aboard Olympic, the Board of Trade is ready for some high-profile witnesses. Charles Lightoller and Bruce Ismay, finally home from Washington, are the two men who are best equipped to defend the White Star Line. Lightoller, aware that everyone involved seeks a scapegoat, repeatedly asks the attorneys to quote his words back to him from the American transcripts. Ismay denies he had anything to do with the ship's speed or with the lifeboat plans. Lord Mersey shields him from harsh treatment. He is looking elsewhere for the villain in this tragedy. The only passengers to testify before the Board of Trade are Sir Cosmo and Lucille, Lady Duff Gordon. His charitable offer to replace the lost possessions of Lifeboat One's crewmen has come back to haunt him. The American press picked up the story and accused him of bribing the men to ignore the cries of the dying. Sir Rufus Isaacs, the Board of Trade's Attorney General, has Sir Duff Gordon explain his behavior that night.
Did it occur to you that with the room in your boat, if you could get to these people, you could save some?
It is difficult to say what occurred to me. I was minding my wife, and we were in a rather abnormal condition, you know. There were many things to think about, but, of course, it quite well occurred to one that people in the water could be saved by a boat, yes. Sir Duff Gordon.
Lord Mersey finds the perfect scapegoat in Captain Stanley Lord, master of the one ship that probably was close enough to rescue passengers from the sinking Titanic. A crew member of Californian, Ernest Gill, has given a damaging interview to the American press about a series of distress rockets visible in the night. Because of this story, the U.S. senators were already prepared to treat Lord harshly. Now, Sir Rufus Isaacs has before him someone who can take the full blame for those 1,522 needless deaths in the North Atlantic. Captain Lord sticks to his story about seeing the lights of a much smaller ship from the bridge of Californian, but his aloof, barely cooperative manner only hurts his case. Back in Washington, Senator Smith concludes the U.S. Senate inquiry on Friday, May 25th. Over the last 17 days, his committee has interviewed 82 witnesses, generating 1,145 pages of testimony at the approximate cost of $6,600. The following Monday, Smith delivers a final report to the U.S. Senate. In it, he praises Captain Rostron for his heroism, condemns Captain Lord for his failure to act, recommends adequate lifeboats for all ships, and calls for standard wireless communication procedures. Congress responds with a medal for Rostron, a bill to review maritime legislation, and a commission to oversee shipbuilding and marine equipment. In England, the Wreck Commission hears its final testimony on June 21st. The Mersey report, delivered July 30th, blames Titanic's collision on excessive speed and slackness of the watch. It blames the confusion on insufficiently manned lifeboats and the loss of life on Californians' actions. It also finds no discrimination against the third-class passengers. The late Captain Smith is forgiven. Bruce Ismay and the Duff Gordons did not behave improperly. The report recommends more watertight compartments on ocean-going ships, more clearly defined rules for lookouts, and finally, sufficient lifeboats for all aboard. In August 1912, Californian Captain Stanley Lord resigns in disgrace from the Leyland Line. At 35 years old, his career is hardly over, but his involvement in the Titanic disaster will continue to hang over him like a cloud. He will try to clear his name until his death 50 years later. Now that government has addressed the Titanic disaster, September sees the first civil lawsuits appear in American and British courts. Renee Harris files a $1 million claim for the loss of her husband Henry. Charlotte Cardeza seeks over $177,000 in lost property damages. Other claimants want to be paid for pets, artwork, or family heirlooms. Faced with $16 million in lawsuits, the White Star Line rushes to prove that it was not at fault. When one British jury finds White Star liable, American claimants bring their cases to England. On July 28, 1916, lawyers on all sides reach an agreement to cap the payments at a grand total of $663,000. The Titanic survivors end up with less than they deserve, but in the process, the world has heard many new stories not revealed by the government hearings. In many ways, the Titanic disaster signals the end of an era. An international ice patrol and new laws about wireless telegraphy will assist and regulate the decisions made by ships' captains. No ship, after all, is truly unsinkable. Humankind, far from mastering Mother Nature, is still subject to her harsh whims on land and at sea. Soon the new royalty of American capitalism is brought to heel by income tax and antitrust legislation. The working class finds its voice in socialism, and a war of machines and chemicals, unlike anything ever seen, is just around the corner. Titanic's memory lives on long after the Gilded Age has passed into history. In 1955, following years of research and survivor interviews, American historian Walter Lord publishes A Night to Remember, a detailed reconstruction of the disaster. He has been fascinated by Titanic ever since a childhood voyage on her sister ship Olympic. His book is credible and compelling. It becomes an international bestseller and inspires a major motion picture release of the same name in 1958. Over 40 years after her sinking, a new generation has discovered the tragedy and mystery of the unsinkable Titanic.